One Sky is brought to you in part by Coca-Cola, serving Alaskans quality soft drinks since 1937. By Cook Inlet Region Incorporated, an Alaska Native corporation promoting economic and social progress for people throughout the state.
Welcome to One Sky, a special presentation of Heartbeat Alaska, a forum for Native issues and concerns. One voice, one sky.
Hello, welcome to Heartbeat Alaska's One Sky. I'm Jeannie Green. One Sky is a discussion on the events and issues that touch the lives of our Native people around the world. Today, John Tetpon interviews Elaine Abraham. Today is Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. Elizabeth Peratrovich was a leader in the 1940s in fighting racism in the state of Alaska. She was a civil rights leader, and today we honor her. John Tetpon speaks with Elaine Abraham from University of Alaska Anchorage. She too experienced prejudice in the 1940s as well as in the 1990s.
Times have not changed very much. Today we're talking with Elaine Abraham, the director of the Native Studies program at the University of Alaska, about Elizabeth Peratrovich, the first woman leader in the civil rights movement in Alaska. Tell us a little bit about her life, Elaine.
Well, you know, she's first of all a Tlingit from the southeast. She was born in Petersburg in 1911. And that was about the time when my mother was about 10 years old, and I was really pleased I met the lady in 1954.
She was a leader in trying to bring discrimination to a stop in all of Alaska, actually. But it started in Juneau, didn't it?
It did. She married into the Peratrovich family. She comes from the Wanamakers, from Petersburg, Sitka, and Juneau. Her name was Elizabeth Jean Wanamaker. Beautiful lady. But I think what got her started was in, I think, 1931, she joined the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood and moved to Juneau to see the discriminating signs.
Describe for me, if you can, the kind of signs that you used to see.
You want to hear?
Yeah, we'd like to,
I was
you know.
10 years old when my mother took me to Juneau. I had to have my tonsils out, and she took me there. And I didn't know any better, but we could only get rooms where we were allowed to stay.
In hotels?
Yeah, the hotels had what it said was no natives, Mexicans, or dogs allowed.
And this was in 19...
But let's see, I was born 1929, and 10 years later,
that was about 1939, 1940.
They were even there and really banned during the war days.
How about the restaurants? They
weren't allowed to eat in the restaurants either. At Percy's, what is now Percy's Cafe, they had a hole in a wall, and they had a sliding door and a bell. It just came up to my chin, and I would ring the bell, and they would serve you whatever you ordered on a piece of brown paper. Rain or shine, you'd stand outside on a sidewalk.
You mean this is the way the Native people were served?
That's the way we were served.
You weren't allowed to go into the restaurant?
It's a hole in a wall. With a sliding
I know it's not
door.
funny. It's not funny, but
I know.
those are some of the kinds of discrimination that some of us have experienced. I experienced that too up in Nome as a kid growing up, seeing signs like no Eskimos and dogs allowed in restaurants and that. But going back to Elizabeth, she apparently saw those signs and wanted to do something about it.
I think it was in the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood is an organization that is for the good of the people, and they spread all over Alaska. But when she became Grand Camp president, I think in the 40s, she moved to Juneau, and she couldn't find a house to rent. because the houses had no natives allowed unspoken.
You couldn't rent a house, or you couldn't buy a house.
She couldn't buy, she couldn't rent. They had shacks along the side of the Gaston channel, and that was it. And I think that really, because she had Frank Peratrovich, her kids. They live here now. Frank Peratrovich lives in Anchorage, and Betsy Peratrovich lives in Anchorage, and her grandnieces, Darlene Wanamaker, Watchman, is one of her nieces.
You know, a lot of people can't believe that this kind of thing used to go on. I don't suppose there was a lot of attention being paid to it until recently. But it did happen, and there was discrimination being practiced in many parts of Alaska. What is it like today?
Well, it seems like maybe it's because of my age, the discrimination is like yesterday because I lived it. Mrs. Peratrovich was a beautiful lady. She was trained with the Sheldon Jackson College, so she dressed up to their level. So when she testified in the halls, she was respected because she could speak well.
She had a real good command of the English language also.
Right, she could speak well, she knew what she was talking about, she knew the laws. But one of the things that I hear about her is how well she presented herself. She was trained with the Presbyterian Church, and I think that was a real plus, but she was eloquent. She was real eloquent in
and
the
this
way
is
she presented
1945.
herself.
Was it 1945? I think she made a floor speech, a speech to the
44.
1944, and asked the legislature to pass the Anti-Discrimination Act.
The discrimination was so strong. We had senators from Fairbanks and from Nome that said, these savages have 30 to 100 years to go before they come up to our level. We don't want to mix with savages. We, as white people, have 5,000 years of civilization. They're not civilized.
And to which Elizabeth responded. I think she made a very eloquent response to that. And she made a statement, something to the effect that if you, as civilized people, have 5,000 years of education behind you, why can't you see that we're just human beings just like you are?
Exactly.
That's paraphrased. But
that was beautiful. But the one that I remember the most is, which goes back to why our languages have deteriorated. Why our way of life has deteriorated. Today, out of the 20 languages, indigenous languages of Alaska, only 18 are alive. The rest are technically dead, and that Central Yupik is alive, and Siberian Yupik, and Central Yupik is in a bad way. Inupiaq is in a bad way, all the Athabascans, but that's why. Because, you know, an Aleut girl in Sitka, her mother and her father were, quote, civilized, and they taught her music. And they wanted to enter her in the public school because they had a good music program. It went all the way up to the judge, and the judge said, no.
You can't speak. You can't speak your language in the school.
You can't speak well enough, and you're still a savage because your Aleut mother takes you to fish camp in the summer.
And this was
1945.
That's not very long ago.
So she was a savage because she went to fish camp.
Did you have those experiences yourself? I mean, did you experience teachers telling you cannot speak Tlingit?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know how many times I stood in a corner, you know, with the naphtha soap in my mouth.
With a what?
Naphtha soap, that kerosene.
Oh, yeah.
They used to put it in your mouth, and they used to put a piece in your mouth and send you to a corner. I was 10 years old. I didn't speak English when I went to school. You know, psychologically, it's just today when I'm 65 years old, I begin to see the damage it took that long. My kids don't speak their Tlingit language. Just, you know, psychologically we're just now beginning to really come out of us.
Well, we're glad to have you here to talk about this, and we'll be right back after a few words.
Thank you, John Tetpon and Elaine Abraham. We'll be back with more discussion on Elizabeth Peratrovich Day right after these messages.
If you have news or information from your community that you would like to share with our viewers, please contact One Sky, 2611 Fairbanks Street, Suite D, Anchorage, Alaska, 99503, or give us a call at area code 907-272-8111, or fax us at 272-7005.
Welcome back. We return to the One Sky discussion on Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. John Tetpon speaks with Elaine Abraham.
We're back talking with Elaine Abraham of the University of Alaska about Elizabeth Peratrovich. You told a little story about your experience traveling to Arizona when you were young. Can you tell me that again?
Yes, I graduated from Sheldon Jackson High School because no Indians allowed in public schools.
How did you go to school?
With the Presbyterian Church,
Oh,
I
I
went
see.
to Sheldon Jackson High School. That was the only place we could go because in 1944 there were still no Indians allowed in public schools. They didn't put up signs, but they didn't let you in. So I went to Sheldon Jackson and I graduated from there in 1948. That was the only place we could go. Otherwise, you couldn't go to high school.
Okay.
And from there, I wanted to be a nurse, so the Presbyterian Church sent me to Ganado, Arizona. I went by train. And see, I thought it was the way of life for no natives allowed. It never occurred to me that it wasn't the way of life. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't right. But I got to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was all by myself. It was about 80 degrees, and I had a fur coat. I had a parka, Eskimo parka on. In Gallup, New Mexico, when I got off the train, there was no one to meet me, so I walked over to the station. I wanted to go to the bathroom, and there were two signs, blacks only, white only in the bathroom. I didn't know whether to go to the black or whether to the white. I was not allowed in either.
So that made you feel like, well, what should I do? Where should I go? Where do I belong?
At 18, then the impact began to really hit me.
What is like today? Today, the acts of discrimination, prejudice has kind of gone underground, and it's sort of very subtle kinds of things. Where do you see it going?
I think, we need to talk about it. It's so deep within us that it's difficult. And when I was growing up and when I came here to Anchorage, where there was no room, we used to joke about it with my secretary, there was no room for me because I'd be in my parka when I walked up to the counter. This is in the 70s. There would be no room. And then I would sort of step back, and my secretary, who is white, would step up and say, I have reservations.
Yeah, this would be at a restaurant or a hotel?
A restaurant or in a hotel, and this is 70s and 80s. Immediately, she would have a place. She was my secretary making the reservations for me. So it's there, but it's subtle. I think another place where it's real subtle is in the workforce.
And job discrimination?
Discrimination, because you have to remember the powers are the ones that make the decisions, and we don't have minorities, or especially Alaska Native or American Indians, in a place where there's power and make decisions.
So how does this need to change? What needs to happen here in order for change to come about? I know there's a lot of work being done in education, in the schools, in trying to deal with prejudice and racism, but it's still here.
Oh, it's so strong.
How do we do this?
I don't know if I should even bring it up.
Oh, well, I think you should.
I don't know if I should bring it up. What happened at the state legislature level with Georgiana Lincoln? That's part of it, is that it is so deep, it is so strong, and that was just blatant about what Georgiana Lincoln was accused of. But I think one area, and it's hard work because Alaska Natives and Native Americans and other minorities, you sort of have to claw your way up to the administrative
Still today,
level.
At the present time.
Yes, and we have to have people in an area where the power is before progress can be made.
How about us as Native people? What can we do about it? What can Native organizations do about it?
I think we can still, we've sort of laid back lately after our big fight with native land claims and our...
So we become a little apathetic, you think?
Yes, and we're sucked off to all of these corporations, keep corporations alive. And corporations are corporations, they're business, they don't take on the social issues. So social issues have died to where we really need to take a stand. And I'm planning on trying to get the Alaska Native languages and the deterioration and the death of Alaska Native languages at AFN. And we need to push AFN to put those issues on their agenda.
Especially in light of the fact that there are so many Native languages dying off. Job discrimination still exists. We still have students in schools who have to deal with name calling and that sort of thing. We're still experiencing that, and somewhere there must be a solution, maybe, to those kinds of things.
There must be an understanding of non-natives. A little boy came to a child of one of my students came to my office the other day. And he was in tears, and this is just the other day, this is a 9-year-old, and he was crying because his classmates were singing Davy Crockett, Killer of Indians. He happens to be an Eskimo boy. And his whole classmates were taunting him at recess, telling him that he needs to be dead because he wasn't white, and they're saying Davy Crockett to him. 1994.
That sort of thing still goes on. I think that's something that the teachers can catch. But also, on the other hand, I was talking with Roy Peratrovich today, Elizabeth's son, who's in Seattle.
Yeah.
And he made a comment to me that racism and prejudice starts in the home. And that's where it begins, by attitudes, by words, by statements that are made by parents. That's something that we also need to look at as a society too, I think.
And we have to educate our people to not just Alaska Natives, but all of the people of Alaska, that we had a civil rights leader, Elizabeth Peratrovich, and she died young. She was only 47 when she died. She was born 1911, but we need more Elizabeth Peratoviches in the cause all over Alaska.
That's true. We've been talking today with Elaine Abraham, who's the director of the Native Studies program at the University of Alaska.
We'll return to John Tetpon and Elaine Abraham right after these messages.
During the Roman era, 28 was considered old.
In the 1800s, 60 was over the hill.
You got it! You gotta taste it all! Oh, the taste of Diet Coke! You gotta taste it all! Yeah, the taste of Diet Coke!
Okay, Elaine, you were talking about having to leave Alaska to get an education. Now you have a You have a master's, or are
I
you?
have a couple of degrees.
Okay.
I have several degrees.
One is a master's degree. We can brag a little bit. Let's do.
Okay. I've got an AA degree in linguistics from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a registered nurse from Ganado, Arizona, Sage Memorial Hospital in the heart of the Navajo Nation. And I've got a bachelor's degree in human services and a master's degree in teaching.
And those were
Education.
received outside of Alaska.
Most master's was at APU. It's recent, but everything else was on the Navajo reservation. This is
Okay. Let's talk about that a little bit. You had to go outside of Alaska to get an education.
Right.
Can you tell me a little
Right.
bit about that experience?
I wanted to be a nurse. I could not get into a nursing school. And the Presbyterian ministers found a school that's for Indians in the heart of the Navajo reservation in Ganado.
So you couldn't go to
Arizona.
Stanford, or you couldn't go to
I couldn't go anywhere because
University of
I was a native.
Washington.
No, nowhere in the country. This is 1944. 1945, discrimination was still really at its height. That's what I was telling you. I didn't know what bathroom to go to in Gallup, New Mexico. And I went to Sage Memorial Hospital in Ganado, Arizona, and that was where I was trained as a nurse. All my classmates were Indians from all over, not just from Arizona, from all over. And we had a black student that came from California because she couldn't find a school to go to. But in Arizona, New Mexico, all of the signs that I saw in Alaska were still there. No Indians, Mexicans, or dogs allowed in the restaurants, in liquor stores, in the hotels. We would come off the reservation, and we could only go to fringe hotels and cafes.
Well, what did that do to your? What did that do to your the feelings
Self-esteem.
self-esteem? That thing we talk about so much sometimes.
Well, for a long time, I was afraid to speak because I have heavy Indian accent, what I call Indian accent. And when the girls from the nursing school wanted to make a reservation at a hotel, we would find a white instructor, because they all had heavy Indian accents like I did, to make that call on the telephone so the person on the other side won't know we were Indians. But that was, the way we
How did you
dressed.
overcome? I mean,
I never really overcame it. I still feel that resistance, because I look Indian, I look Eskimo, I can be from Chivak, I can be from Barrow, I'm so Indian. And even today, when I'm going to make a reservation at a hotel, I ask my children to call for me.
really,
Because they don't have that heavy Indian accent, but there's a
you're
reason.
still the feeling's still there. It's still there.
I moved here in 1978, and I made those calls to the different places to rent a house. I got turned down on all of it. Then a white person came along, called the same people, and got a house for me. They could recognize my heavy Indian accent. So it's still there.
It's still there. The people who experience this kind of subtle kind of discrimination, and people from our generation, I think, I too experienced having my mouth washed out with soap for speaking my language, and Inupiaq. And that has taken a long, long time to overcome the feelings of low self-esteem and that sort of thing. And it takes a lot of hard work. But for those young people and children who experience this in school today, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Oh boy, that's a toughie. We've come a long ways. They don't have to face those signs for one thing.
Yeah.
But it's what we pass on to them unconsciously. You're much younger than I am. My grandchildren...
Not by very much.
It's what I passed on to my children. They don't speak Tlingit. So all my age group throughout Alaska, whether Athabascan, Inupiaq, or Yupik, passed the same feeling out to that age group that are now in their 30s, and they passed it to the grandchildren. So we have two generations passed this unknowingly, all our behavior from being discriminated against.
The way I've overcome it, for myself at least, is I make statements about my culture and saying that there was nothing wrong with it, there was nothing bad about it, our religion, if we want to call it that, was just fine, and our language was just, it's beautiful. We, you know, the native languages, I think, all across the state are beautiful languages. And those kinds of things that are, you know, are things that I think young people and students can make, you know, positive statements about their culture. So I'd like to thank you for being here. We've been discussing Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. Elizabeth Peratrovich was the first civil rights leader, woman civil rights leader in the state of Alaska. And we wanted to pay some respect and homage to her for the things she has done for us. Thank you for being here.
Sitka Alaska me inyugli ikaleong neksok visualaila. Tabrasin ikalekyak sivluni allaw lugo. Sumipayak inyugalo ako vid ikalek kinirmun utikuminaktutin nakakasabamon mingwakto ko nariwalo akli. Sumilika kipirniyo nigovin. Ilisimadakrat kanutipayatigon ikayutitigon kukulalutin 800-770-0138.
Thank you so much, John Tetpon of One Sky and Elaine Abraham of University of Alaska Anchorage. We'll return next week with more discussions on events that touch our lives here in Alaska and actually Native people around the world. See you next week.